Welcome to Building the Future. I'm your host, Kevin Horick. You can check out new episodes of the show every Tuesday and Thursday at 2 p.m. If you missed an episode or want to get more information about the show, please visit buildingthefutureshow.com. SoupX, the Startup Expo, North America's premier startup conference, is March 6th and 7th, 2017, in sunny Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Affordably priced, SoupX is a 2-day international conference featuring workshops, panels, speeches, a $50,000 startup competition, and over 100 exhibitors. For more information, go to sup-x.org. Welcome back to the show. Today we have Tyson Koska, founder of On Trajectory. Tyson, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Kevin. Glad to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you on the show. I think what you're doing is actually really interesting, and I love how you kind of still have like a day job, and then you're building a startup as well. And I'm not saying one's more important than the other. It's just I think a lot of people are always told that they need to quit their day job and kind of just go and work on this thing. And I think some people don't want to do that, can't do that, or so I love that you're kind of doing how you're doing things. But maybe before we kind of get into what you're doing, let's get to know you a little bit better and start off with kind of where you grew up.
Sure. I'm from northern Baltimore County. It's just north of Baltimore, Maryland, and I grew up out in the rural/suburban forest country of Baltimore County.
Sure. Okay. So you grew up there. What did you end up doing? You went to university. What did you end up taking in university?
Well, I came to university as a slightly older student. I first spent 4 years in the military. I was a helicopter pilot back in the Desert Storm, Desert Shield days.
Wow.
Which I needed because I came from not a super rich family and with not too many opportunities, and the military helped me then pay for college, and I was through the GI Bill.
Gotcha.
So it took me about 10 years to finish college, but finally managed to do it.
Okay, so you were in the military, and then you ended up going to college. What did you end up taking in college?
I started out actually as an English major. I had it in my mind that I either wanted to write or to teach people how to get excited about the written word. In the course of my studies, I fell in love with philosophy, both the logical part of it and the aesthetic part of it, and ended up being a dual major of English and philosophy. I will mention, though, that all through my high school years, I was very math, science oriented. So this was sort of a mid-20s switch for me to go into the arts.
Sure. Okay, interesting. So what did you end up doing after you graduated university?
Well, I immediately began teaching. I was started out teaching 7th grade English as a long-term substitute to sort of understand if I wanted to pursue a teaching certification. It turned out to be a horrible experience. That's a hard age for anyone, I think, and to sort of just kind of throw myself in there and try to work with kids during that time of their life ended up being much more than I had anticipated. And I refocused on adult education. I finally ended up teaching as what I thought was going to be a stopgap before going back and getting my doctorate, to teaching desktop applications. We're talking Microsoft Word, Excel, and began teaching some more difficult classes, some networking classes, and through this teaching experience, ended up getting my Microsoft Systems Engineer certification, and from there have been in IT ever since. Okay, so before we kind of continue on, so how did you kind of get involved in IT? Were you self-taught? Did you kind of take some classes, or how did you kind of learn how to do all that, the tech stuff? Well, that's a little bit of a long story. Well, not too long of a story. When I was about 13 years old, I decided to open a snowball stand. And so
Okay.
a kid down the street and we opened a snowball stand, put it right outside. I come from a very small town. We sat outside. We sold snowballs for the whole summer of 1981. And this was, pretty close to the beginning of when personal computers became affordable for the regular person.
Sure.
I made $500 that first summer.
Wow.
Ended up buying a TRS-80, which has been much derided, but for me it was my own money, my first computer. Taught myself how to program in BASIC. Started taking apart programs that I would, back in those days, of course, they were on cassette tape, and I would go in there and manipulate the code and try to learn what I could. And then, so that was my first real exposure to IT. Was completely self-taught, and I had always stayed as a real lover of computers. Although, to be honest, I had never considered a career in it. And as I said, when I graduated college and I did the middle school teaching debacle, computers and technology was something very easily that I could do without having to think much about it, for adult novices. And as I started that teaching experience, I fell back in love with all of the creative logic of a computer. You can make it do what you want to do. You can make beautiful designs. You can make applications. It's up to your own creativity as long as you understand the logic. And so, I really love both of those sides of developing software.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I think that's really awesome. So you're in this IT. You're teaching. What did you kind of? At what point did you kind of become a consultant, and what do you kind of consult on?
Well, after doing the adult learning, the teaching gig for a while, I sort of went, that old maxim, those who can do and those who can't teach. I sort of wanted to do a little bit. I'd gotten into teaching without ever really doing. So it was a real challenge, not a challenge, but a desire to get hands-on, to get dirty. So after a few years and I got my certifications, I just started applying for jobs. Now this was back in the late 90s, and the career field was just going crazy. People were getting picked up with very little experience, and I luckily found a company that was willing to support me to help flesh out my skills, and I did a lot of on-the-job learning, and just had a great career. Just starting off learning the ropes and doing a little bit of everything in IT. I ran cables, but I also coded and set up networks and project managed, and eventually became a software architect, and that's sort of where I am today is architecting solutions for banks and insurance companies and other kinds of large firms.
Sure. I think that's awesome. And I love how you've kind of been on both sides of the table, where you've kind of been in the trenches actually building stuff, and then you've been on kind of the business side, it's like, for lack of a better term, right? Where you're actually kind of, doing the project management, you're working with the people actually kind of in the trenches actually building the stuff. And I think, and then you've kind of also dabbled in the network side. And I think that's super important. And I think you probably, obviously, like most people, enjoy one side better than the other. But the fact that you've kind of played on both sides and you understand where both sides are coming from, I think makes you more rounded, and you really understand kind of as projects come to you and there's challenges, and sometimes you're like, I don't get why that side doesn't see it like me. But when you've been on that side, you can understand and you can relate to all members of the team better.
I think that's exactly right. I can feel everybody's pain.
Yeah.
I have felt everybody's sort of needs and pain points over the years. That's a good characterization.
Yeah, and I love that. Even like I've always tried to do that too, and I recommend to other people. It's like just because you don't do the other side of the equation, you should at least try it, even if it's just on your own time or on a small project or something, so you at least understand where they're coming from. And I think you grow as a person, and it makes your life a lot easier or less stressful sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, I would absolutely agree with that. People are so quick sometimes to become only see something. I don't want to sound cliche, but you'll see things from just one perspective.
Sure.
And really, it's great advice that you mentioned. Go out there and do the other side. Try it out. See what it's like to play that other role.
And you might hate it, but it's fine. You learn what their pain points are, right? Like, I don't know. Like, I'm the first person to admit I do not like project management. Can't stand it. I work with a great project manager, but like I've tried it. I don't like it, but at least I can understand where he's coming from,
I can tell you, I started out this career hating project managers, thinking they didn't do anything, they were worthless, they didn't know what they were talking about. Now I love a good project manager, and I have so much respect for that career field. But I will absolutely agree with you. I do not enjoy it at all.
Yeah, but
it is a hard job.
Totally. So you've been consulting for a number of years. You've worked with some really big name companies that everybody's heard of. At what point did you decide to do your own startup, and how did that the idea for On Trajectory come to be?
That was, it was one of these situations where I was looking for something and it didn't exist.
Okay.
My wife and I, we lived, we didn't have any children. We lived downtown in Little Italy of Baltimore, one car, lived in a nice townhome, and had a pretty simple life as far as, life complications were concerned. Then she got pregnant, and we had to start planning for, not just ourselves, but our child. And then, in fact, within 20 months, she was pregnant again. We knew that we wanted to move out of the city. We wanted to have a little bit more space for the kids.
Sure.
And all of a sudden, I realized that the sort of simple financial, hey, keep an eye on your investments and sort of have in mind where you want to be in a few years, that simple sort of trajectory was not so easy to figure out anymore. How much house did we want to buy? Should I contribute to the kids' 529 plan, or do I contribute to my 401k, or do I, there are all of these variables.
Sure.
And you can find tools on the internet to answer any of those specific questions. How big will my 401k be in 20 years? Or, how much do I need to save to reach X amount in today's dollars in a 529 plan for my kids' college tuition?
Sure.
You can find that. But understanding how they all interact together, because if you're putting money into the 529 plan, you're not putting it into the 401k. So you need a tool or a method that you can understand this complicated trajectory. Add to that, hey, I want to go on vacation, or should I not go on vacation, or I want to buy a house, or I want to buy a new car. These things all affect your financial plan. And most of the tools that exist, you can put one number in. Here's my salary, or and this I think is kind of crazy. You tell them how much you're going to save for the next 30 years. Well, how can you possibly know how much you're going to save? And it's not consistent. You're not going to save the same amount every month for the next 30 years.
Sure.
If you buy a new car, you've got a car payment. You buy a house, you've got a house payment. So in my quandary, I started just to make gigantic spreadsheets. I know a lot of people, having spent the past few years trying to come up with a solution. Most people like me, out of their own frustration, they build these massive spreadsheets, and they're
Sure.
fine for one person. My spreadsheet became so massive and so complicated, and friends of mine wanted to start using it, that it dawned on me, I cannot be the only person with this frustration. And that was the impetus for On Trajectory.
Sure. Or probably in a worse situation, they do nothing and they just kind of wing their finances.
Yeah, that's right. So the folks like me, they go in and do the spreadsheets. Most sane people just say, well, this is the mess. What am I going to do?
Sure. So okay, so you built this. We'll get into kind of features and what exactly the product does for a second. But so you come up with this idea. How did you end up executing, getting the software built? Did you code it yourself? Did you outsource the thing? How did you kind of get version 1 built?
Right. Well, since I have been programming off and on since I was 13 years old,
sure.
I was comfortable enough to build a prototype. And with that prototype, I took it to some other friends because, I'm in the industry. So
right.
I know people that know people, and talked to some friends and said, here's what I think is missing. And I'll never forget, I would have these conversations with people and they would say, well, that has to exist. That has to be there. I said, then show me, do a search and find a tool and give it to me because I would love to use it. Sure. I would rather not have to build it. And so, the right mix of folks came together, guys that have some good database and background, back-end experience background, and also a member of our team also has some machine learning AI experience.
Nice.
So, we were able to pull together a team that was fairly dedicated and get together a beta, which we ran for probably a year and a half before having anything official come out. And so during that beta period, and even today, if you go to ontrajectory.com, very prominently in the bottom of the screen is feedback and feature recommendation section built into the UI, and we receive feedback every single day, features people would like to have, of course, questions and learning items. But we have a pretty active community of folks that are helping us make the tool better for everybody.
Sure. No, I think that's great, and I love how you kind of used your existing network of people to actually build something, and the fact that you took a year and a half kind of while you're still working, right? Like, I want to be clear that you didn't quit your job to work on this. You're still, doing the consulting role and you're building this kind of, maybe parts during the day or in the evenings and on weekends, but you're still working.
Right. So, and just to be clear, there was a huge necessity to keep my consulting separate from this startup. Not that there was any overlap not that I was delivering any sort of product like the one that I was building, but it's very important to keep your head in whatever sort of game you're in. So since I traveled, there was an advantage here. I would go to my job during the day, and when I would get back to my hotel room, because I didn't have the kids to take care of, and my wife is wonderful, and she put up with my traveling for many years.
Sure.
I was locked in a hotel room by myself. So this was sort of like my lab, my place where I could experiment and come up with ideas, see what works, and that's where 99% of the website was developed, was sitting on a hotel bed, looking out the window and coding on a laptop.
I love that. So let's get into kind of some of the feature set of what On Trajectory does for people. You kind of covered it a little bit, but maybe let's dive a little bit deeper into it and kind of what exactly does it do for people?
Right. Well, we had two really key design goals that I was very passionate about up front.
Okay.
And of course, I've already mentioned a little bit about the 529, 401k,
Sure.
IRA, that sort of what we're doing from a long-term financial planning standpoint. But the two key design points that are still very critical. One is an extremely low barrier of entry. So when you first get an On Trajectory account, you enter literally 4 pieces of data. How old are you? How much do you make per year? Have you managed to save any money at all? And are you saving going forward?
Right.
Now, that's not a lot of data.
No.
And, most financial planning tools require you to understand taxable versus tax deferred versus, this or that. We don't ask any of those questions. We just want to know those 4 pieces of data. And we can actually draw a pretty interesting long-term financial trajectory based on those 4 pieces of data, because if you're a certain age, and I'm talking U.S. here, we know basically when you can start collecting full retirement from Social Security.
Right.
We also know, based on what you save per month, we know about how much your expenses are, so we can make some assumptions there. We also know that people tend to cut back their expenses in retirement, so we make some assumptions there. So we have this whole series of assumptions that we use to show you something very quickly. But now this is a critical point, and one that we're still trying to overcome.
Okay.
That's the beginning of your planning. That's not the end of your planning, right? That's getting those 4 questions is really giving you a starting point that makes sense, and one that gives you a firm foundation to actually start building out your personal, unique financial situation. So that's the second design point, is how do I get from a super low barrier of entry, how do I also offer a tool that has got maximum customization to meet anybody's particular financial need? And, of course, we think we've got that right balance in On Trajectory. So the assumption is after you go in, you answer those 4 questions, then you go into the account tab and say, well, I've got an IRA, or I've got a 529 plan set up, or I want to set one up in a few years for my kids. You go in and you say, what are your, I've got a mortgage, or I've got a car payment, or I've got a spouse, and here's my spouse's income, right? So the expectation is after that very easy entry, then you set it up uniquely, to your own situation.
Got you. Okay.
And then I would say the last key. Well,
no, go ahead.
Should I keep going?
Yeah,
okay.
Keep going.
I would say the last key element. So those were our 2 guiding design principles. But then something that we think does not exist, or we haven't seen a good example of it, is a tool that engages with a person over time. So once you do that, you spend that time tailoring it to your own situation. On Trajectory lets you check in as often as you like, indicate where you are from a savings and investment perspective, and then we adapt the trajectory based on what you've entered. Now, I don't mean to say we're changing your assumptions. Your assumptions are still drawn on the chart, but what we do is, let's say, for example, the stock market is on a tear, and your investments have gone up inexplicably by 15% in a very short period of time. We let you key in that value, and then we just kind of draw a shadow line showing, well, if things kept going, this is where you might end up, but we don't necessarily change what your plan is. And the expectation is, as the market goes up and as the market goes down, and as you have a life emergency and you've got to tap your resources, but then you come back and you refill it, you're going to see that drawn, that accurate past will be drawn for you. You'll know where you came from, and knowing where you've come from, that gives you much more confidence and much more clarity about where you're heading in the future.
No, I totally agree with that. I think that makes a lot of sense. So I know right now you guys are free, and both your plans are free. So what does kind of the free plan include? And then let's kind of cover the paid plan that's going to come starting in November.
Yes, yeah. So we're, like a lot of websites, we have sort of this freemium model where, we want folks to get in, we want folks to use the product, and if they just have a very low need, or if they just kind of want to check in once in a while, see where they are, and be able to engage on a casual level, that's what the free plan is for. And you can enter, a certain number of income streams. You can enter in a certain number of expenses and a certain number of accounts that you may have. Now, the paid plan is for someone that's, wants a lot more clarity. They've got, a pension and a wife's social security or a spouse's social security, and they've got different expenses that they're budgeting for over the next 5, 10, 20 years. They've got lots of different ways that they want to do like a what if analysis, or they want to plan different contingencies. So we do offer a premium plan, which will be going live in November. It just allows people to get much more in depth with their financial plan.
Sure. No, I think that makes a lot of sense. And so I'm curious then, do you have kind of an average amount of time that you dedicate to On Trajectory in a week, or does it kind of really range based on maybe if you guys are rolling out new features or you need to test stuff, or how do you kind of break up your week between, the consulting and then the startup?
It's challenging, to be honest.
Sure.
Sometimes I will be lying in bed and a feature idea will come to me, and I'll literally not be able to sleep. So I'll pop up and I'll go downstairs, put a pot of coffee on, and my day will start at 3:30 or 4 o'clock in the morning, and I'll get a few hours of work in before I head off to the office. Another example of how we get things done, we plan weekend retreats. So there's 3 partners, and the 3 of us will literally leave our entire life behind, get permission from our spouses and significant others, and we'll go to another city, and we'll get an inexpensive hotel room, and we will literally lock ourselves in a hotel room and code for 40 hours straight. I mean,
really?
We do what we have to do. Yes.
I think that's amazing. And I know, like, I've started to really realize over the last few years that you need a huge support system, whether it's from your significant other or family or friends, especially as your life gets more complicated, as you get married and there's kids and whatever else, right, is going on in your life, that if you don't have somebody or like a few people kind of supporting you, that you just can't pull this stuff off, right? Like
you can't, no. And I really appreciate what you said earlier about you don't have to quit your job and walk away from everything and immerse yourself. And I do believe that's true. But the flip side is you absolutely do need people to talk to about it, people that are encouraging, people that are in it with you. And I'll tell you, it has taken me much more work than I ever expected it to. But at the same time, the feeling of pride that you have when you have a product that you think is helpful, and I'll tell you, I get emails a couple times per week from people that say that that they're depending on us. They're so pleased that they found us, and we're giving them a way to view their own future in a way that makes them feel comfortable and in a way that they feel like they have control over. And that's just a great feeling.
Oh, there's like nothing better than when you're actually making a difference in somebody's life, right? And when you get those emails, right? Because I don't know how often you get them. It sounds like quite often, but like majority of people never actually tell you when they're happy with something, but they'll tell you when they're not happy, right?
Oh, yes.
And I love getting that.
My inbox has, right? Yeah, my inbox definitely has more questions and suggestions for improvement than I have compliments. But when you get those compliments, I'm really thankful. To be honest, I braced myself because I know how the internet is. I know how people are. We've grown up seeing trolls and how it can be. But there are some very kind people out there that really appreciate a tool that is helpful, and they'll take the time and compliment you and say so. And I'll tell you, if it wasn't for people actually voicing a thank you once in a while, I'm not sure I'd still be doing this.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree with you. And it's interesting because like I do this show as kind of a side project as well. And there's days that you don't, or like there's weeks or months that go by where you don't really hear from anybody about like anything good or bad, right? Like you just don't really hear anything. And then all of a sudden you hear like, oh, like somebody's like, yeah, I was on your show and I got all the, a bunch of people reached out to me and you're just like, oh, awesome. Like, so it's almost like you need that reinforcement sometimes to keep you going in these things, right? So I totally get that. And to
Yep.
your point, I love the fact that you're so open to taking customer and user feedback because there's so many people out there that are just like, nope, I know what the customer wants. And I'm sure that there's things that you've added to the product that you probably never even thought of that, a couple users said, you should really add this. You're like, yeah, I probably should.
Yeah, yeah, and sometimes, customers will ask for something that's honestly crazy, but
Sure.
sometimes they'll be so incisive, and they'll say, "Why don't you just do this?" And it will be something easy to implement. And I have, again, because we're a small team, I've been able to implement for people a feature request within, a day or two.
Wow.
I'll code it up one evening. I'll send a note out to the person that does our QA. We'll do a QA run. We'll promote it up through our environments and have it out, within a day or two. And then I'll send a note to the user, and the users, they're just amazed
Yeah.
that A, someone listened to them, and B, that we were able to do it so quickly. So yeah, that is also true.
I think too, because obviously you guys are still kind of early on in this thing and you're just kind of coming out of beta into a paid environment. I think a lot of people are scared to release stuff before, like kind of how you guys did it. And I think the nice thing about it is when people get on and they're kind of early adopters and they start seeing their feedback make it into the product, people love that they have kind of like
they
input.
become champions.
Exactly.
That's right.
Exactly. That's the best way to put it. Yeah. Like I think just involving people in that is awesome from their end as well. And I think a lot of people are scared to do that with their startup, right? And I love how you guys are doing that.
It's interesting because I don't know how much of the sort of lean startup and the literature that's out there, but I think things are shifting in that direction where people will take a chance and get something out there early, which is a reaction to the sort of Apple computer. And I'm not criticizing anyone, but
Sure.
the Steve Jobs "I'll tell you what you want" sort of perspective. So because technology costs have come down so much, and folks like me can have an idea and birth it, I think you'll probably see, or at least I hope you see, a lot more people take a chance, build something, solicit feedback, and then really make something that's useful. I mean, the problem is if you spend thousands and thousands and thousands of hours and you never show anyone, well, when someone criticizes it, you're going to get defensive, or it might be so solidified already in your mind that you don't want to change it. But if you do get things out slowly and reactively, and you're answering a real need, then you've got something much more organic and something that potentially I think could be far more useful to people.
Sure. No, I totally agree with you. And I think it's interesting too. You made an interesting point there, like about getting kind of offended, right? If you spend a bunch of time, like if you literally get an email from a client and they say, can you add X feature? And you literally take 24, 48, or 72 hours and you release it to them, they are not going to have crazy expectations that it's like, it does everything under the sun because like, right? But they can.
That's right.
And like, if they do say, no, that's not really what I want, you're like, well, I only spent maybe like a few hours or a half day, right? Like instead of like 40 or
That's true.
400 hours on this feature, right? Where you could say, oh, okay,
That's
well,
right.
They're like, well, can you tweak this a little bit? And then you put in maybe a couple more hours, you tweak it, and you keep going. And I think it's a lot more easy to swallow when people give you feedback on things that you haven't spent a huge amount of time on. I think that's a really good point.
And something else that's really nice that I've seen happen, and I'll just use an example from On Trajectory, obviously, because it's
Sure.
on my brain. But we had a feature request where so part of our ease of use is that in On Trajectory, you're always working in today's dollars. So if you've got you want to buy a car in 10 years, you don't have to wonder, oh, what's inflation going to do to car prices in 10 years?
Right.
You don't have to think about it that way. You just think about it and say, well, my current car, I have a current car payment of $300 and I want to buy a slightly better car. So let's say in 10 years, I'm going to have a $350 car payment. So you enter $350 in for 10 years from now. And so On Trajectory will go ahead and figure out that inflation. Well, that's nice from a certain perspective, but let's say you have a mortgage on a house.
Sure.
And your mortgage is, my mortgage is $1,200. Well, since we automatically adjust for inflation, that means our calculation engine, well, I should say used to, our calculation engine would do $1,200 this year, and then $1,200 plus inflation next year, and then $1,200 plus 2 years inflation 2 years from now, which is clearly wrong, right? Because your mortgage does not increase with inflation. So, we had a user say, gosh, it would be really helpful if certain expenses I could just freeze and they don't inflate. And I thought, you know what, that's true. That's really an accurate thing. And not only did it help him, it helped me do some better financial planning. But in the long run, after I implemented that do not inflate checkbox, a user then came and said, hey, healthcare is supposed to inflate at a rate higher than inflation. Why not, instead of just a checkbox that says do not inflate, let me set my own inflation for a particular expense? Well, since I had already implemented the do not inflate checkbox, to give the user number 2 what they were looking for was a much less of a feature gap than it would have been. So I might not have been able to do it unless I'd already taken those smaller steps to get there first.
No, I think that's a great point, and I think that makes a lot of sense. But we're kind of coming to the end of the show, so maybe let's close the show with mentioning where people can find On Trajectory online and any other kind of social media links you want to mention for yourself or the company.
Well, so, it's very easy, www.ontrajectory.com. We do also have, of course, a Facebook page and a blog and a few other, Twitter account. These our social pages are not quite as active as major corporations is going to be because we're spending most of our time, doing development, talking to our users, and doing some marketing. I will also. I was going to mention. I just wanted to mention that apart from the things that we've discussed, the On Trajectory, our next iteration, our next big thing is that we're going to be integrating to, or our hope is to be integrating to other financial institutions. So look for, hopefully in the not too distant future, instead of users having to go in and update, remember I talked about that progress, that being able to update where you are, we'll be able to get that information automatically. So similar to a site like mint.com does, where they can automatically get updates and sort of do the tracking for you. So we want to become much more integrated into people's financial lives, and we want to be able to get proactive. So if there's a big change, we can let you know either on the upside or the downside so that you can be aware of those changes as they occur.
That's great, man. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy day to be on the show. I look forward to keeping in touch with you and, keep building the future.
Thanks, Kevin. I really appreciate this podcast and or the radio show that you're doing. It's fantastic that, you take an active look at all of these these new future technologies and bring them to folks. So you're doing a great job as well.
Well, thanks. I really appreciate it. Yeah, it's always nice to hear feedback like that. So, thanks again for doing this, and we'll keep in touch, and we'll talk soon.
Okay, take care.
Great, man. Bye. Thanks for listening. The music for the show was done by Electric Mantra. You can check them out at electricmantra.com and keep building the future.